Hi there, John Wilkinson, History Made Easier. When looking at America in the 1920s, we sometimes talk about the Roaring Twenties, or my favourite, the Jazz Age. But sometimes America in the 1920s is described as an age of extremes, and that can apply to America in the 1930s too. If we take, for example, the image of the skyscrapers going up in New York, or the whole excitement behind the motor car, we can contrast that with the fact that most American farms in the 1920s were without electricity. And many American farmers, the sharecroppers, were literally scratching a living, desperately poor. And if we take the image of the flappers and the whole excitement of American nightlife, and even the excitement of the speakeasies, we have to contrast that with the fact that the majority of Americans were living on or below the poverty line. So an age of extremes. And if we take the whole thing of the American dream, that anyone can make it to the top, well, we have to contrast that with the terrible racism that prevailed in America in the 1920s and into the 1930s. Lynching was still a feature. The treatment of African Americans was appalling, and the treatment of the newer immigrants that had flooded into America. A stark contrast with that American dream. And if we look at the political divide as we look at the New Deal, we see still a sharp divide between Republicans and Democrats. I have a quote here from my book that looks at the New Deal, my ebook on the New Deal. And I quote President Hoover and his famous Liberty speech in response to Roosevelt's threat to change the makeup of the Supreme Court. This is what Hoover says. "Liberty is crumbling over 2/3 of the world. In less than a score of years, the courts in a dozen nations have been made subject to political power. And mark you this, in every instance the persuaders have professed to be acting for the people and in the name of progress. We have already gone far on the road to personal government. The American people must halt what is proposed to lay hands on the independence of the Supreme Court, when it is proposed to lay hands on the independence of the Supreme Court. It is the last safeguard of free men." That's what former President Hoover had to say. Roosevelt's response came some years later, in 1944, when he said, "True individual freedom cannot exist without economic security and independence. Necessitous men are not free men. People who are hungry and out of a job are the stuff of which dictatorships are made." So an extreme difference rather in political views. I was almost going to say extreme political views. I hope they're not too extreme in that sense. But there is an extreme difference between the way the Republicans viewed the New Deal and the way Democrats did. And so we see in the 1920s, in the economy, in society, and in politics, we see a sharp divide. And the New Deal didn't do anything to bridge that divide. If anything, the New Deal only made it broader. So the age of extremes seems to fit. As always, I thank you for listening, and I give you a little reminder to check out my History Made Easier website. Cheers.